Welcome to this episode of Mosaic Days. We are your host. I'm Leonard,
And I'm Allison.
and we're here to talk about behavior, prevention, intervention.
Behavior. It's your favorite thing to talk about.
It is my favorite thing to talk about. I've been doing behavioral stuff for decades now, and it's something I'm really excited about. I love the science behind it. I love the creativity behind it, and I think it as amazing as it is. I think it's probably the most difficult part of the educational components that we do.
I definitely agree. I think, you talk a lot about science and the background and just the logistics of behavior and really understanding behavior because you have that broad knowledge, that deep expert knowledge of it. There's so many things though I think about that really you can do as an educator and administrator that is just I'd say basic level that I think sometimes people skip over because they think it's so complicated. And it's very intimidating. And I think that there are just some key things that you can do right off the bat. And it can start the process of really understanding a student's behavior.
Yeah, so we're going to take a look at that from the teacher's perspective, from the administrator perspective, and kind of I have some guiding questions for consideration for administrators and teachers. But I will say this: there's has to be some thought behind it. There has to be some planning behind it. It needs to be methodical. You can't just say, I'm going to verbally praise every kid when they enter the room.
Hmm.
It can't be that generic. It has to be explicit. It has to be concrete. I've created some forms over the past 10, 15 years to kind of guide teachers into thinking about what does their classroom look like? How do they create their norms? What do they do to build community? So those are the types of things we're going to talk about and give some educators some tips out there. But these tips do translate to the home too. These are things parents should consider. You have to have a plan for home too. So it's not just for the educators; it's for the parents and the families that work with our kids, whether they have disabilities or not. We know kids
Yeah.
need structure. We know kids need encouragement. And so, what are we doing to provide those opportunities?
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that what you do with one kid that works is not going to work with every other kid. So every kid has to come into this. They have to be a unique um, case where you're really looking at what is going to work for this kid. And I think sometimes that can be really difficult because our educators and even our administrators, I think they go to these trainings all over the place and they learn these strategies. And then they take, like you were saying, they take it back, and they bring it back to their classroom and they're like, well, but it didn't work for these three kids. Well, there's a reason behind that. We have to kind of think holistically what is important for every child in our classroom. What is it that they're going to benefit from? What is it that's going to motivate them? And every kid is very unique and different.
Yeah, I agree with that. And when we take a look at the RTI or the MTSS pyramid triangles, that tier one is your prevention. I
Hmm.
would say it's what every kid has access to, and then when kids are non-responsive to that, then we look at a tier two or a tier three intervention. So it's methodical. You have to take, and you're right, it's holistic. You have to take a look at most of the kids are going to respond to prevention. And then if you see some kids are non-responsive, then you have to move them up a tier and focus on individuals. So let's talk a little bit about behavior and systems in place. I think it's important. So, like I said, I think about it as a questions to guide you. And again, as we've said, when we start making some of the content available, we can put some of the stuff in there. But so, as an administrator, how are you building community so that everyone feels like they have a place?
Yeah.
Every kid and staff member has to feel like they belong. A sense of belonging creates relationships, and you are more likely to want to support one another when you have that community. So, what structures do you have in place that build community? Um,
Well, and we talked about that last week. I mean, that was really at the basis of our building relationships and how we start out the first few weeks, but that has to continue and be consistent across the entire year. So you don't just stop after week two and not focus on building that community. The community has to be strengthened and effort. You have to put intention and effort into continuing that community, that strong community, and not just to your staff and your students, but also to your families as you move throughout the school year.
Next question. What structures are in place to acknowledge appropriate behavior? This is the key one
Mm,
because we can easily start talking about progressive discipline, but that's a reactive strategy, right?
yeah.
And so what systems do we have in place to acknowledge appropriate behavior?
Okay.
What structures are in place to address inappropriate behavior? So you have to have both of those running in tandem, right? You have to have a system to acknowledge positive behavior. You have to, of course, you have to have a system that acknowledges when kids do not behave appropriately, but they have to be very formal. And I would say we focus on progressive discipline more as a reactive strategy than planning to work on a system in place to acknowledge appropriate behavior. Okay.
Yes,
I,
definitely.
and I always say if you have a kid, if you have a classroom of 35 students and everyone's supposed to be doing silent reading, and the one kid is off task, who do you focus on? Do you focus on the one kid or do you focus on the 34?
Hmm.
And so again, our mindset is to look for the kid who's not fitting in and address that behavior. And I would argue that we have that system a little backwards. We need
Yeah.
to target kids who are on task. And even if it's a kid who's perfectly behaved in class, we shouldn't deny that child reinforcement.
Yes.
Here's another important one. Who is the one doing the acknowledging of positive behavior and addressing the inappropriate behavior? This becomes key because it should not be the administrator on campus as the only person. We talked about community. So, in looking at community, every staff member and students as well should be part of that reinforcement. They should
Hmm.
be acknowledging positive behavior throughout the campus.
Yep.
So again, it should be clerical staff, it should be teachers, it should be custodians, it should be parent volunteers, maybe upper class students that are the higher grades can reinforce the lower grades. There has to be a way for everyone to acknowledge appropriate behavior, because if you don't, and it's only one person, then typically that's the person that's going to receive the appropriate behavior, and so it's got to be really kind of a shared commitment.
Yeah. Definitely agree. So I was waiting for your questions to finish because all of this reminds me of PBIS, and I don't know what type of, which is positive behavioral intervention systems and supports, um, which really is a school-wide system. It's something that is established from day one. It's more, you see it more in elementary levels. So I don't know if you're familiar with PBIS. It's more at the elementary level of really developing that um, system of incentives and supports to address behaviors, both positive and negative. And so both of my kids right now are going through PBIS at their schools. It's a consistent thing in my kids' district. And they're getting, for instance, at my little one's elementary school, they get paws of praise because their mascot is a lion. And so they get little paws, which are positive incentives if they're
Oh
seen
yeah.
doing anything right. So that's the consistency that you need to see. They get it from the nurse in the office. So a lot of what you were talking about is everybody knows the system. Wherever you are on campus, everybody knows, everybody acknowledges the yard duty, the maintenance guys, the principal, the teachers, peers. And then at the end, then there's that motivation where they can turn their paws in for incentives at the end of the
Yeah.
month.
Simple token economy, and that's that's probably one of the go-to system wide kind of management systems you can use for students. And I will say that it's going to look different at the third grade level versus the 10th grade versus the high school. So the principles are the same. The application, the implementation may look slightly different because you have your third graders that might do a high five or a fist bump, but the teenagers at the 11th grade don't want anything to do with that. So you have to make some adjustments based on, like as you were saying, what's going to motivate. Like what type of reinforcement do the kids want to receive, and then make sure you provide. Again, it has to be systematic. It has to be written down. It's not like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to fist bump this kid, and and I think some people do it organically because that's part of their personality. We don't want that here. We want a system where everyone knows what to do and when to do it, and we're all doing it throughout the day. So it could be, hey, today make sure you give 10 fist bumps to 10 different kids today, and that's your goal. And
Yeah.
has to, again, that's how you develop consistency of implementation.
Well, and parents need to know about that. So you've put it in your handbook, you've put it in your newsletters. It's something that everybody has to have buy-in. Everybody knows what the system is and developing it in a way, because one of the key things that I talked about for administrators, developing it in a way where the kids remain in the classroom. Because the last thing that we want to see are kids being shipped out to the administrator regularly. So how are we being proactive as opposed to reactive, like you had mentioned, so that kids remain in class, kids have that positive experience in class, teachers follow up, and in every class that the kids go to, they know what the expectations are in terms of behavior.
Yeah, we want to keep kids in class, and I remember back in the day where you didn't want to send the kid to the principal or the administrator, so we do swap between teachers, right?
Yeah, yeah,
This kid's not behaving appropriately. I'm going to send him to this teacher. Get your stuff and
yeah,
go to this teacher
yeah,
because you didn't want to be seen as that teacher who sent the kid to the principal's office all the time, and so it's kind of a workaround.
yeah. But how do you think that made the kid feel, right? I mean, that's like,
Uh,
yeah, I don't want you, so someone else has to deal with you right now.
Well, you bring up a good point because that feeling of rejection. Some of these kids, that's their behavioral history. They're not. They feel unwanted. They feel rejected by sometimes family members, community members, staff, and so the kid hasn't had an opportunity to receive enough reinforcement to warrant behavior change. Some kids want that because it's attention seeking. So you really have to figure out, how do we develop these deep relationships with these kids so that they want to participate and they want to stay in class. And even despite the fact that they may be having a bad day at home or in the community, the school's the one place that they can get some positive reinforcement.
And I remember there was a TED Talk. I don't know if you ever saw it, but Rita Pearson, and she talks about how that kid that you need a break from. The kid that really is a struggle for you as an adult. That's the kid that's always going to show up. They are never going to be absent. And so I find that, as educators, oftentimes, even, and I can be the first to say that I did this too. You might need a breather from that kid. You really want to be mindful and supportive and patient with that child, but they may just have gotten on your last nerve, so you ship them out, right? And so how are we taking those kids that really need that understanding and kind of rewrite school for them because it has been negative, like you said, might be negative experience at home. For many, many years, it's been a negative experience in the classroom. How do you rewrite that and turn that around so that that kid feels welcome, that that kid knows that you're willing to work with them, and that the next day, going back to what we talked about last week, it's a new start. It's a new day. How are we going to reset everything and have a positive move forward?
Yeah, we have to think about this too because it looks different for a second grader versus a 10th grader.
Yeah.
And so that second grader might have an easier opportunity for behavioral change because they're fairly young and they probably haven't had, and possibly not had a lot of negative interactions with adults. But when you're taking a look at a 10th and 11th grader who's had years, I mean, we're talking about 4, 5, 6, 7 years of negative interactions with adults, whether they be parents, community members, or teachers,
Hmm.
you can't undo that overnight. People have to
Yes.
understand one thing: behavioral change is slow. It's very slow. It gets slower the older children get. And so we need to be mindful of that. And so when we say, and we hear it all the time, I tried that, it doesn't work.
Hmm.
Well, we had to put the context into it. If the kid has had negative interactions for 5 years and we're trying to do some reinforcement, the kid's not going to immediately respond to it. The kid doesn't know how to respond to it because they've been programmed that they're going to ultimately have negative interactions. So I always say, be patient, stick to the plan. We're talking about individual kids now. I think make it very prescriptive. This is what we're going to do when we see this. And so I think the more, we do behavioral terms, so we can operationally define what that looks like and be very prescriptive, even with the statements that we make to kids, and we do that with uniformity over a long period of time, we will see some behavioral change. It's not easy, which is why most people don't want to do it
Yeah.
and they want to go back to yelling and suspending.
Yeah. So I wanted to actually ask your perspective.
Uh-oh.
Just about, I know. You're the expert, man. But just wanted to talk about, so often it's hard for adults to see that they are the first ones. They need to reflect and they need to change in the way that they approach a student. And I think that that's one of the hardest things that we don't always address. Um, how are we as an adult? How do you get an adult, in your opinion, how would you get an adult to really start to reflect and look at what they're doing with a student and how that might be triggering to that student and increasing escalation?
Wow, that's probably the greatest question of all time when it comes to classroom management and behavior,
Yeah.
because it's a difficult thing because teachers or staff members, not just teachers, but staff members get really defensive, and it's difficult at times because people, emotions get in the way. Sometimes we bring our what's going on at home into the classroom. It's not an easy thing to separate yourself. When we talk about this all the time with dealing with conflict and how our emotions get the best of us, and sometimes we respond in ways we shouldn't respond, because when that gets escalating, unsurprisingly, we also start escalating.
Hmm.
And so how do we remain objective and rational when it's going down in the classroom? So I would say we need to hear staff members out. We need to honor their feelings and their perspective, but at the same time, we need to start a prescriptive intervention. And that takes some hand holding. And,
Yeah.
I can't, we see it time and time again, which is why professional development becomes ineffective, I feel, where you sit down in a 2, 3 day training and we expect staff members to go back the next day and immediately implement that with fidelity. If there's no coaching, if there's no hand holding, if there's not some type of accountability system in place, some type of reinforcement for the staff member, more than likely they're going to try something and then they're going to revert back to old practices, and that's not the way this is done. This definitely not the way this is done.
Yeah. Well, and for adults, a lot of times it's a power struggle, right? They want to be the ones that are the adults. They're the teachers. They're the ones that are making decisions. They're the ones that are giving directions, and that student has to follow. But more and more, and especially with the older students that we work with, these power struggles, the adults are never going to win. Nor should there be a desire to win. And I think the minute that an adult tries to, challenge an 11th grader, you're going to lose right off the bat. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one of those things that I just think that people are completely, that's a struggle because they still want to see that they are the adult in the relationship and that they're the ones, similar to being a parent, they're the ones that are making the rules. They're the ones that are making the call, and the child has to respect that.
And I think you bring up a good point, and I liken it to, parenting. When a kid's 5 years old, you can say, I wouldn't recommend it, but you can't say, do it because I told you to do it.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we hear.
Yeah.
Go clean your room why? Because I told you to clean your room.
Yeah.
That may work up until about the age of 8, maybe. And
Yeah.
again, I wouldn't recommend that. That is not going to work as a 10th and 11th grader when you're in the classroom. So we have to look at that old school mentality of I'm the teacher, you're going to do what I tell you to do.
Hmm.
That's not a very good way for running a classroom. That's not building community. You're looked at as the rewarder and the punisher, and judge, jury, and everything. So you have to look beyond that. You can't take a look at your role in the classroom as the authoritarian, the disciplinarian. It doesn't really work that way. And so you're going to get into those power struggles, as you mentioned. And that, I would say, I would posit that that's not the greatest way to run a classroom.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that I also think about with behavior, either as an administrator or a teacher, is really to look at the visual signs from a student. And I think sometimes people struggle with that as well. I think they, especially when you have students with such diverse needs, maybe students with disabilities in your classroom, maybe a more moderate, severe program, body language says everything. And you could sit and just observe a kid and you're going to know right away either they're agitated, they're frustrated, whether or not they're verbalizing it. And I think sometimes we kind of overlook that. And so we as adults engage, we try to get close to them, we try and provide them the right level of support. But if you actually step back and observed and took the time to really look at that child, you would be able to determine, I think, what that child is feeling in that very moment.
Yeah, I think we also talked about resources for teachers and administrators and looking at developing systems school wide and classroom wide. And I think at some point we talked about possibly doing a book study to look at some of these resources. So I would
Yeah.
say Tools for Teaching by Fred Jones is great. So there's also like I would say the ultimate reference in behavior and intervention is the PRIM, the Pre-Referral Intervention Manual, the BIM, which is the Behavioral Intervention Manual, the thick reference guides put out by Hawthorne Educational Services, and they really do have behavior challenges and strategies to address those. And then the
Yeah.
BIM even goes further to develop goals and measurement of goals. So a vastly underutilized tool.
Yeah.
You don't have to guess what the intervention is. You look it up and you implement. So again, a great resource for teachers or administrators looking at creating a school wide or classroom wide token economy or classroom management or dealing with specific behaviors. Um, let's kind of focus more on the teacher aspect on what teachers should do to implement behavior support or address behaviors. It's got to be explicit. Again, it has to be explicit. What are you doing to acknowledge behaviors in class, whether they're appropriate or inappropriate? What's that classroom management look like? I'm a big fan of group contingency paired with individual contingency. So the group earns points. I'm sure you've seen like marbles in a jar.
Hmm.
Every time we catch a kid doing something good, we put a marble in the jar. And then when the marble's full, the class gets access to some type of privilege like maybe computer time. I've also seen a class thermometer. So there's a
Hmm.
visual representation
Hmm.
of a thermometer in class, and you get a degree every time kids are doing something appropriate. So got to be visual. Kids want to be shown that they're making progress toward a goal, whatever that goal may be. Have you seen some of those things in place?
Yeah, definitely. And I've used those. I had a marble jar, I had a point system up there. I had table group points, I had whole group points. One thing that I did want to talk about, though, when it comes to that, is removing those points that are earned. And so, one of the things that I find that is a really negative thing across the board that I always, and this was something I think I learned within my first few years of teaching. Once a point is earned for positive behavior, whether it be group, whether it be individual, whether I was handing out a ticket or a positive praise token, that child gets to keep that. So the idea or the notion that you remove that for other negative behaviors that have happened, especially with a group setting, is a really negative thing. Only because usually it's one or two kids. When you have the whole class and you have, the positive points going in the marble jars or the marbles, going in to fill up the marble jar, and then all of a sudden, Zach, has an outburst, and then you take away marbles because Zach had an outburst. Those kids are going to gang up on Zach, and then that becomes a really negative place for him. And so my philosophy was always once you earn those marbles, once you earn those points, you don't get to take that away.
Yeah,
What are
we
your thoughts on that?
that's a big one, and I think that's kind of abusing the system. I probably would call it, and it's a control thing, and the teacher reverts to control. And so
Hmm.
these systems aren't a way for a teacher to exert control.
Yeah.
And so you're looking to build community, you're looking to acknowledge positive behavior. And so once something is earned, you're 100% correct. You cannot take away as a punitive. I've seen some staff members where classrooms are earning negative.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're well, you have no marbles left, and now the next marble I'm going to give you, I can't give you because you're
Yeah.
functioning at a negative, and so that's a misuse of the system. And I would encourage when you start these systems, you have to guarantee that the kids are going to reach that goal really easily. And so that's what reinforcement is, right? We reward at a high level early on, and then we start looking at explicitly fading that back. And so the principles are sound if you follow them, but you definitely should not be punitive and be taking tokens away once they've been earned.
Yeah, eventually those students, they just shut down and they're like, well, what's the point? I'm just going to get all this stuff taken away. I've seen also teachers do that in regards to, I don't know, maybe they have to fill out a reflection sheet and then the reflection sheets just keep piling up. I mean, it's a negative consequence. And those kids are like, screw you. I'm not going to do, I'm not going to do that. It's an unfortunate thing. And the teacher gets really, really upset about it. But ultimately, the kid is not willing to work for somebody that they don't feel respects them. And that right there is an adult basically saying, I don't have respect for you. And I'm not validating the hard work that you had 3 days ago when I gave you those extra points. So it's definitely a negative thing.
Yeah, I mean, think about the concept of detention. And, some schools still use detention. I'm going to keep you after school for 15, 20, 30 minutes as a punitive when ultimately that translates to school is a negative experience and I got to
Yeah.
stay here longer now. So the one thing where, again, it's community, it's safe, um, but now you're turning it into a punitive situation. So we really got to shift our mindset and take a look at that child's perspective of what's going on around. And I think that's a difficult thing to do because, we got teachers got so much stressors going on. They
Yeah.
got to manage a bunch of kids. They have to grade a bunch of papers. They have to create assignments. They got to enter grades. They got to take attendance. They got to do parent conferences. It can be overwhelming. And so I think once you develop a system and you start fine tuning it over the months and over the years, it has to become automatic at some point. But early on, it's not, and that's why it's got to be explicit. It's got to be methodical. It's got to be prescriptive. It's got to be timely, and it has to be explicit for staff. Because
Hmm.
special ed teachers usually work with the paraeducator, maybe two, maybe three more adults in that classroom, and so you have to make sure everyone's on the same page because if one person is not, they're going to wreck your whole classroom management system.
And we could do a definite, I mean, that's something that we should talk about is how do we work with those paras, with all of the adults in the classroom and help not only support the behavior system, but also the academic components of the class. How do we ensure that we are promoting student independence? Definitely something that could be a whole episode.
Let's see other stuff. So group contingency, individual contingency. Got to realize, as you mentioned before, some kids are going to require individual approaches. So you have to, what does that look like? I'm big on students charting their own individual behaviors. We talked about, I think last time, even academically, but behaviorally as well. And you can do that at 5 years old. Could be happy face with something in front of them, immediate. To older kids might be a little bit more complicated or complex systems. But I'm really big on kids charting their own progress and kids evaluating what their behaviors were like during that day, and so they can earn access to a reinforcer. So for those kids that require that extra level of support, targeting that behavior, talking to the kid about what the behavior is, talking about what should the behavior look like. And so we talk about maybe some Montsevier classrooms where we take pictures of the kids doing the behavior right. So you
Mhm.
can look at a visual prompt versus a verbal prompt. I'm not big on verbal prompts. I think we do it too often and typically frustrates the students and the staff in the process.
And you talked about just using a happy face. I mean, kids are motivated by the simplest things. I think sometimes teachers, they overthink what that student needs. There has to be a rating system or there has to be a tally mark or there has to be whatever. Kids are good with stickers. They're good with a happy face. They're good with anything, a ticket. I used to get those big rolls of the raffle tickets,
Hmm.
so you have 1,000 billion tickets for like $5 or whatever it was. Kids they're incentivized by the smallest things just because it reinforces that visual, like you're talking about, shows them, yes, I'm on track. This is what is expected.
So as we wrap this up, again, I think the key points are it's got to be written down. All the staff have to be on board. It has to be consistent, and you want to reward kids as often as possible, whatever that may look like. And it might be, an assembly. It might be ice cream party. It might be, tokens that are raffle tickets that are raffled off every day or at the end of the week. We want to make sure that we have a consistent implementation, and we need to know what the goal is. The goal is we want to build community. The goal is we want kids to be successful. And I think, as you mentioned, once we get to the punitives, we're ensuring that kids will not be successful. So I think that has to be an explicit goal on why we're doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to reset, and tomorrow's a new day. So even if there's that reflection that needs to come at the very end of the day, we're going to return and tomorrow's a new day and we start fresh and back into the expectations.
And that's such a wonderful thought. We have to reset. We have to come back as a new day and give kids unlimited opportunities to be successful, it's very hard for people to do that. I think we
Yeah.
tend to internalize and we almost make it feel like it's a personal attack on us on why these kids won't behave. And I think once we start getting in that frame, that frame of mind, then we can't move forward to trying to build that relationship with that kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And kids need to understand. I mean, it, most kids do not want to get in trouble. At the end of the day, they do not want to get in trouble. Even if they are attention seeking, they don't want to sit there and have somebody, an adult especially, thinking poorly of them. So, that's such a, most kids will come in and they're so used to it that they'll just kind of act like they don't really care. But at the end of the day, they want validation from an adult that they're cared about, that it's a safe environment, that they believe in them. And so anything that you can do to kind of allow that child to reset and start over the day again, greet them, give them a high five. Today's going to be a great day. Whatever it is that makes that kid feel like he or she can come back into your classroom and be accepted and cared about, is just going to help reinforce the positive aspects and things that they need to do differently next time.
Yeah, today is going to be a great day. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Every time a kid walks into your classroom, today is going to be a great day.
Yes. So we did 30 minutes on this, but I can tell you right now, we could probably do 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks straight on talking about behavior. There's so many components to it. It's
Uh, you
very
know,
intricate.
yeah, I love talking about that, but we'll save that for another episode. This has been Mosaic Days. I'm Leonard,
And I'm Allison.
and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.